Okay, so hello everyone. Today let me show you how you can properly diagnose what this right here, this icon right here means. Okay, so that icon right there represents your oil pressure. So should you start your engine, okay, and that thing turns on, or should you start your engine or you have your engine running and that thing turns on, that means you have a problem with your oil pressure. So however, don't be too overly concerned just yet. All too often the culprit for that thing turning on is because of just a faulty oil pressure sending unit. Now if you're wondering what that is and where it is located in this engine, a 4D56 engine, you will find that screwed on this oil filter housing. Okay, so you see, this is the oil filter housing, this is the oil filter, and it is below the, I hope you can see that, the oil filter housing. That's the thing right there, okay? So, and this is the wire that sends signal towards your dashboard, okay? Now, before we crawl underneath the vehicle, the simplest thing that we can do first is to check our oil level. Now, so that's our dipstick right there. Now, bear in mind, the best way to check our oil level is to let the engine sit there for at least an hour or so, maybe even overnight. That way we can be sure that all the oil has dripped down into the oil pan. I'll show you the difference, okay? So this engine right here has not been started for at least about maybe 2 days. Okay, so I'll pull the dipstick out, and as you can see, that is our oil level. So we have these notches right here, and it lacks oil but not too much. Anything up to here is good, anything beyond here is over the limit, and anything up to here and below that is you need to replenish it with oil. Now I will show you the difference when it comes to checking your oil level immediately after the engine has been turned off. So I'll start this engine now, okay? So as you can see, this indicator right here should not turn on when the engine is running. So that indicates to us that there is a problem with the oil pressure. Okay, so it has been 5 minutes now. I'll turn off the engine and let's check our oil level and see the difference, okay? Okay, so let's check our oil level. And you see, let's dip it again. And you see, it is only up to here. That does not even reach the second notch. Now, if you do that, it might lead you to believe that you lack oil, but that's not the case. It only shows that way because the oil has already circulated inside the engine. That's why you need to wait for at least about an hour or so, or maybe even more, so that you can have an accurate reading of your oil level. Okay, so now that we know that we have sufficient oil, the next thing that we would want to do is to check the terminals of the oil pressure sending unit, okay? Nice. Okay, so you see that wire, that red wire right there? I'll try to pull that out while trying to show you a better. Okay, so you see that? Let's try to see if that's clean. Okay, so as you can see, there's some oil in it. I'll try to clean that off, and I will also try to clean that terminal connected to the oil pressure sending unit, okay? Okay, so I will just brush this terminal like so. Okay, let's clean this off just to make sure that we have good connection, and I will also clean the terminal on the oil pressure sending unit, okay? Okay, so let's start the engine. And it did not go away, so that did not do the trick. So let's crawl underneath the vehicle and remove and diagnose the oil pressure sending unit. Okay, so before we crawl underneath the vehicle, or any vehicle for that matter, make sure that it's safely secured on jack stands, okay? So we do not want the vehicle to be falling down on us while we are underneath it. So before we remove this oil pressure sending unit, make ready your oil pan to catch the oil. Okay, so because a little bit of oil is going to drip out of here. Okay, so oil pan is ready. Just use this adjustable wrench to loosen the oil pressure sending unit. Okay, so it's very difficult to do this with one hand, okay, and one hand on the camera. Okay, so now that's loose. You can now remove that by hand. Oil is going to drip out of that. Okay, little bit of oil. You see, that's where it is screwed on to. Okay, so it's dripping oil. Okay, so here's the oil pressure sending unit. Now, before we go out and buy a replacement for this, let's make sure first that this thing is really indeed the culprit for our light turning on. Now, how do we do that? I'll show you, okay? Now we can diagnose this by using a multimeter. It's on the continuity test, okay? See, should beep. Now, I'll connect this terminal right here, and this test probe and this test probe right here, and it's going to beep. Okay, now should pressure be applied into that hole right there, okay, represented by the oil, the beeping should stop. Now in this case, we're going to simulate the oil pressure via an air compressor, okay, or compressed air. So this is just a NPT 18 NPT thread, meaning it's got a taper. Okay, now should I press the L, okay, applying pressure on the pressure switch or the oil pressure sender, the beeping should stop. So okay, in this case it's not stopping. Now we're now sure that this thing is no longer working. Okay, I'll compare that with a new and working oil pressure sending unit. Now unfortunately we are under a lockdown quarantine, so no auto shop selling spare parts is open, but fortunately I bought this a few years back. I made a mistake with this terminal and this terminal, but they're basically just the same. It's just this that's different. Okay, now let's try to test this one. This is a new one. Okay, so you can hear that beeping. Okay, should I apply pressure, it's going to stop beeping. See? Apply pressure. See? The beeping stops. Now, that's how an oil pressure sending unit works. Basically, this is just a switch, okay? No pressure, it's going to beep. On your dashboard, it's going to light up. If you have pressure, the light on your dashboard is going to turn off. In this case, it's going to stop beeping. Okay, so now we are sure that this is the culprit, and now we can just replace this. But before doing so, I'm just going to take this terminal out and just going to solder it on here. Okay, I'm left with, okay, so now I'm going to solder this terminal like so. Make sure it's clean here as well. Okay, very easy. Apply soldering flux. Okay, put this like so, and now we will carefully apply heat on that terminal because we do not want to damage the internal workings of this switch. Okay, okay, so that should do the trick. Okay, so that has been soldered there nicely. Now before we put this back on the vehicle, let's check first if we did not damage the internal workings of this thing when we applied heat on it. Okay, so now let's check again if the pressure switch is still working, and yes, it does. Now you might ask, what if this thing, after performing a diagnostic test on this thing and it's in working condition? What does that mean then? That's a problem. That means you have a problem with your oil pressure or your oil pump. Okay, and if that is the case, you need to take the engine down, because the oil pump is located here on this front case, like so. Okay, this is the oil pump assembly. Now in order to get to that, basically you need to bring the entire engine down and take it all apart. So if you do that, might as well perform an engine rebuild or an engine overhaul. However, before doing so, perform a few more tests. Okay, I will show you how as well. This way we can totally eliminate guesswork. Now the simplest thing for us to do in order for us to find out our oil pressure is to attach this onto the oil filter housing. This is just 1/8 NPT thread. This is a pressure gauge. Okay, so anything between 0 to 100 psi is good, because a good oil pressure should only be between 25 psi to 30 or 40 psi. But anyway, what you really do not want to see is very low oil pressure, or this thing is very low or below 10 psi. That means you have really low oil pressure, or should you see this arrow flicking like so. If that is the case, then you have a poor circulation of oil pressure, and that means you have a worn out bearing journals on your crankshaft, or on your Conrad bearings, or the journal of your crankshaft bearings, and that means the tolerances are no longer within spec. So in any case, if that is the case, then you need to perform an engine rebuild. You need to bring the engine down. Okay, so as you can see, the pressure gauge is there. I just tighten that on there, and let's start the engine and let's see our pressure. Okay, so like I said, at least about 30 psi. Okay, so we have good oil pressure. So that's how you check if you have good oil pressure. Okay, very easy. So all in all, that's how you perform a diagnosis of your oil pressure sending unit. And now we can put this back on and let's see if it works, okay, or that solves our problem. Now it comes to screwing this back onto our oil filter housing, you do not need to use Teflon tape on here. Why? Because like I've said, the screw is tapered. This is an 1/8 NPT, meaning it's got a taper on it. The more you tighten this, the more the screw is going to lock onto the thread that is located on the oil filter housing. So okay, you don't need to use Teflon tape. However, because of that taper, be advised, do not over tighten it, because if you do, you might crack open the oil filter housing. And okay, so just like that. Okay, like I said, don't over tighten it. If you feel it already snug, then stop there. Start by screwing it by hand. Then if you need to use the wrench, do so. Tighten it a little bit, just don't over tighten it. Okay, I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, so the next thing that is left for us to do is to connect this terminal like so. Very easy. And now we can start an engine, and let's see. So let's start our engine now, and should the engine start running, this should turn off. Okay, so as you can see, now before we call our job done, see if there's any leak coming out of there. So there's none. So we've done a great job. Okay, I do believe that's it. That's how you check your oil pressure, as well as diagnose and replace your oil pressure sending unit. So thank you for watching.